Welcome back to our episode on Headspace Diaries, and this is the episode that I hinted at in the previous few episodes. That's right, this is the Rain Man episode. For those of you who haven't watched this incredible movie, I will fill you in, and if you don't want me to spoil this for you, fast forward a few seconds. So the story goes like this. Charlie Babbitt discovers that his late father has left most of his fortune to an unknown older brother, Raymond, who is an autistic savant living in a care facility. Frustrated, Charlie takes Raymond on a cross-country journey hoping to gain access to the inheritance. Along the way, he learns about Raymond's extraordinary memory and abilities, but more importantly, he begins to understand his brother beyond his diagnosis. What starts as a selfish mission slowly transforms into a heartfelt bond, teaching Charlie about patience, empathy, and the true meaning of family. Now, you might be wondering, what is so special about this movie? Why is it in a psychology podcast? Because this movie was inspired by the life of Lawrence Kim Peek. In fact, to play this part, Dustin Hoffman actually met Kim Peek and other individuals who displayed savant mannerisms to study them for the role. So, if you're wondering who is a savant, or a savant as some people pronounce it, a savant is a person with exceptional knowledge or skill in a specific area. And Kim Peek was a savant from an early age. Around the age of a year and a half, he could read both pages of an open book at once, one page with one eye and the other with the other eye, which is frankly an incredible style of reading, very unique. And he kept up this style of reading till he died in 2009. And he could also retain 98% of the information he read, so he wasn't reading passively. And he spent most of his time in the library, which made him a living encyclopedia and a walking GPS. Unlike in the movie, he didn't have autistic spectrum disorder. He was just strongly introverted. So there's some fabrication in the movie. And my sources state that an MRI scan of his brain revealed an absence of corpus callosum, the anterior commissure, and the hippocampal commissure, the parts of the neurological system that transfer information between hemispheres. In a sense, Kim was a natural-born split-brain patient. Now, split brain surgery or corpus calloscotomy is normally a harsh way of alleviating epileptic seizures, which are kind of like electrical storms in the brain. Now, you don't understand. If you are from the fields of psychology and neuroscience, you will understand how big of a deal this is. But if you don't, I'll just tell you a little bit more about split brain surgery. Now, in this split brain surgery, they remove the corpus callosum. That's why it's called the corpus calloscotomy. Now, what does the corpus callosum do? Well, it divides the brain into two hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and it facilitates the exchange of information between these two hemispheres. We cannot talk about split brain surgery without mentioning Michael Gazzaniga and Roger W. Sperry. They were the first to study the split brains in humans and found that several patients who had undergone a complete calloscotomy suffered from split brain syndrome. Now, split brain syndrome is when both hemispheres of the brain act as independent brains, and there's problems coordinating movements, and they have their own opinions. Both hemispheres have different opinions and trouble coordinating because there's no facilitation, there's no connection between the two. So to further my point, one of Gazzaniga and Sperry's patients pulled down his pants with the left hand and back up with the right hand in a continuing struggle. Another of their patients, Paul S., had a fully functioning language center in both hemispheres. This allowed the researchers to question each side of Paul's brain. When they asked the right side what their patient wanted to be when he grew up, he replied an automobile racer. When they posed the same question to the left side, however, he responded a draftsman. Although you need to know that it is very rare to find a person who has a fully functioning language center in both hemispheres, because the language center is predominantly in the left hemisphere of the common people. Now, When you read with your left eye, the information first ends up in the right hemisphere and must be transferred to the left hemisphere via the corpus callosum to be processed. This long transfer from one side of the brain to the other is usually a disadvantage. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about how information or stimuli enter our senses and get perceived in our brain. If you're talking about visual information, our visual information gets divided into two sides because of the field, according to the field of vision. So everything in our left field of vision goes to the right side of the brain, and everything from the right field of vision goes to the left side of the brain, right? And that happens with each eye. So it might be complicated to hear, but it's very easy to understand with a diagram. Now, this is called contralateral transfer of information because they go to opposite sides of the brain. We also have ipsilateral transfer. So auditory information gets passed into the brain through contralateral transfer as well as ipsilateral transfer. So auditory information enters both the same side of the brain as well as the opposite side of the brain. Now, it's speculated that since Kim Peek didn't have a corpus callosum or a hippocampal commissure, his brain would have had to develop the ability to process language in both hemispheres. This, of course, gave him a major advantage in terms of speed reading and information retention. But the same is not applicable for other skills, because Kim Peek was unable to reason his way through mathematical problems. Despite his brilliant mind, his IQ was 87, which is significantly below normal, and it was also difficult for him to follow directions of certain kinds and to do certain motor tasks. However, he was different from the split brain patients because he did not exhibit any of the symptoms of truly split personality or conflicting desires deriving from separate hemispheres. Now, we know that the brain can transfer information indirectly through subcortical areas. Normally, it is a relatively small amount of information that is transferred that way, but Kim Peek may have developed the additional subcortical connections for information transfer. Peek's ability to retain large amounts of information may have had something to do with another condition he was afflicted with called macrocephaly. This brain abnormality consists of an excessively large head and a correspondingly huge brain. In fact, Kim's head was so heavy that it took several years before he could hold it up on his own. So let's look at the schooling of this very unique individual. At age 7, Kim did attend school, but he was subsequently tutored privately. By age 14, he had completed a high school curriculum. But the local system, that is the local school system, would not recognize his achievement. And as an adult, he used to earn $40 a week completing payrolls for 86 employees of the Salt Lake City School District. This was pre-movie. Then the movie Rain Man was released. And this movie led to many requests for appearances both in person and on television, which increased Peek's self-confidence. Barry Morrow gave Peek his Oscar statuette to carry with him and show at these appearances. It has since been referred to as the most loved Oscar statuette because it has been held by more people than any other. Peek also enjoyed approaching strangers and showing them his talent for calendar calculations by telling them on which day of the week they were born and what news items were on the front page of the major newspapers that day. So after gaining fame as a savant, Peek toured and demonstrated his abilities, often visiting schools, traveling with and assisted by his father, who cared for and managed him, performing many motor tasks that Kim found difficult. Peek died of a heart attack at his home on December 19th, 2009, aged 58. So he did end his life journey, but not before inspiring many people to realize that intelligence is much more than an IQ score, and that you are much more than what your diagnosis is, what you were born with. Whether you were born with limitations, you can be so much more. So, if you know someone extraordinary, not exactly like Kim Peek, but maybe someone just as special and intelligent who would bring a smile to your face, share it with them. Let them know that you're thinking about them and be the reason someone else smiles today. Thank you for listening to Headspace Diaries. If you like this episode, comment down below what you think we should talk about next, and don't forget to follow this podcast for more episodes like this.